Thank you, Pastor Jason, for the invitation to be here with you. Thank you at Night Church for coming out today, and for those of you logged on. And thank you, worship team. Wasn't that amazing? I'm telling you, it just ushered me into the presence of God with an awesome time of singing and worshiping God through music. I appreciate it so very much. And to be here for the final message of the Overflow series. And as in the last couple of weeks, as Pastor Jason have been talking to you about money, I'm going to just continue that and talk to you, which means that if you've been coming, you know what you were in for when you came today. So no surprises, right? If you're first time, what it means is don't go buy a lottery ticket today, because today is not your lucky day, all right? We're talking about money. All right, so just thank you for being here. Trish and I have been looking forward to this. We've been getting to know your pastors, your staff for the last few years and pouring into them and just love them. And can I tell you, church, you are being served by top-notch folks that love God, love serving you, and they are a staff second to none. And we just love them. We're so thankful. And we figured that the church would be a reflection of those who serve you, and thus far we found that out. You guys are awesome, and we've loved worshiping with you today. My wife Trish is sitting right over here, but you can see her better up here on the screen. And yes, I can hear what you're thinking. I did outkick my coverage when I married her, and you are exactly right. I married up big time. But Trish and I are glad to be with you today. We're talking about overflow generosity. This apple, picture of this apple right here, is going to represent today how you and I see things. That's our perspective of how we see things in life. Maybe it's the way you're looking at a relationship right now, or the possibility of a relationship, or the way you're looking at your job, or the job you need, or maybe it's the way you're looking at schooling that's maybe about to get started back, or maybe it's the way you're looking at your finances, your possessions, money right now. That's the way you see it, and this is the way it really is. You ever had one of those aha moments, one of those moments where something happened, you got a little bit more information, somebody said something, did something, you got a different perspective, and you saw things differently than the way you've been seeing them. Maybe you begin to really see the way they are. Nothing really changed except your perspective. You see, here's the problem that I want to address today. Every one of us could be looking at money, both what you've got right now in your wallet, in your bank account, or what you hope to make. You could be looking at money in ways that are robbing you from experiencing the overflow that God wants for you. You've been looking at it a certain way, and here today, my prayer has been that God will, through His Word, back things up and help us to get a full picture of the way things really are. His perspective. If I may, getting God's perspective on it. The Apostle Paul called that renewing of our minds. In other words, a new way of thinking and seeing things, a new way then, therefore, of doing things because we see things the way God does. Now, Pastor Jason shared with you the words of David, who talked about overflow. I want to share with you the words of Solomon, who many believe was the most wise man that ever lived. And here's what Solomon said in Proverbs chapter 3, verse 9 and 10. He said, "Honor the Lord with your possessions." That is, esteem God for who He is. Show that through your possessions you know Him to be who He really is. And with the first produce of your entire harvest. That's the first cutoff of your gross. So honor the Lord with that. Here's what He says. Then your barns will be completely filled, and your vats will overflow with new wine. Now that's a proverb. That's not a promise, but it's a generally true statement. And a very wise saying that Solomon said that if you and I will honor the Lord with our possessions, with our money and that which money can attain and gain for you, then we will live in the overflow of God's grace and God's peace and God's love and God's blessing. And that's what we all want. You see, here's the way I say it. When we see through God's eyes, we're motivated to do what God says. Everyone that's a parent has said these words. Well, let me just ask. How many of your parents, and you're not too tired to raise your hand? Could I just see you? All right, your parents. So I'm pretty sure that all of us at some point in time have said these words to our child or to our children, do as I say. Right? That's usually what we say when we don't want to go into all the detail about why we're saying what we're saying and why we're telling them to do what they need to do. Do as I say, and that's fine because we're the parental authority and they need to learn to respect authority. That's going to serve them well in life. But at some point in time as a parent, we need to stop saying, do as I say, and we need to start saying, see as I see. In other words, take time to explain to them why we're saying what we say. Help them to have a mature perspective of the situation. Help them to have an adult perspective of the situation. So when they begin to see things the way we see it, they'll be more motivated to do what we say or to understand why we're saying what we're saying. And the same is true with God. When we begin to see money, as well as every aspect of life, the way God sees it, then when we read what He says do, we'll say, oh, that makes sense. You see, the fact of the matter is, I didn't come to talk about money to get anything from you. And I know your pastors well enough to know that they didn't invite me to get anything from you. We don't want something from you. We want something for you. I'm here today because I want you to have God's perspective about how He sees money so that you can live in overflow and experience what God has for you. So Luke chapter 16 is where we're going to look today because Luke wrote an account that helps us to understand how God views money. It's through the words of Jesus, a story that Jesus taught, a parable, if you will. And as Jesus began to teach this, He looked around. He's teaching it to His disciples, but He notices that just beyond His disciples, there's another group back there. And the Bible tells us that in that group were the tax collectors, the publicans, as they were called. These were the Jewish people that had kind of sold out and were working for the Roman government to gather taxes and getting rich doing it. And then in that crowd there were sinners. Those were a conglomeration of people that were not living godly lives, and they were very successful as well. And then there in this crowd were the Pharisees. They were a religious group of people, but they were also very well off. They were rich through religion. And the scribes as well. So there's this group of rich folks out there, and they're listening to what Jesus had to say. And Jesus, being the master teacher, knew who was in His audience. And so He begins to tell this story. We'll pick it up in Luke's Gospel, chapter 16 and verse number 1. And He also said to the disciples, there was a rich man who received an accusation that his manager was squandering his possessions. So Jesus is telling this story about a rich man. We don't know how rich he was, but he was rich enough that he hired someone to manage his personal affairs, his personal finances, as well as his business ongoings. Invested his money, did business, kept the books, and all of that. And so he's heard this accusation against him that the manager was squandering or was irresponsible with his possessions. And so verse 2 says, so he called the manager in and he asked him, what is this I hear of you? Give an account of your management. In other words, I want you to bring in the books. I want you to bring in the spreadsheets, the ledgers. I want us to go through them. I want you to show me what you've been doing, how you've been spending, what you've bought, sold, and all that, how you've been collecting those that owe. I want to see it all because you can no longer be my manager. In other words, you're fired. Bring in the books. Let's settle it up. And then I'm giving you your walking papers. So verse 3, then the manager said to himself, what should I do? The same thing you and I would be asking ourselves, right? What am I going to do? I'm being fired. What should I do since my master is taking the management away from me? I'm not strong enough to dig. And that's his way of saying, I'm a white-collar guy. I work in the office. I don't work outside. No callus on these hands. I'm not strong enough to dig. I'm ashamed to beg. So he says, what am I going to do? Now I want you to understand the situation for this manager. He's got a little bit of time and he's got a little bit of opportunity to figure out what he's going to do to secure his future. A little time and a little opportunity to figure out what to do. Now, I don't know how much time passed between verse 3 and verse 4, but by verse 4, he's figured it out. He says, I know what I'll do. I know what I'll do so that when I'm removed from management, when I'm fired, when I'm no longer working here, people will welcome me into their homes. In other words, somebody else will hire me to come in and manage their affairs. I won't be out on the street. I won't be homeless. I won't be penniless. Somebody else will hire me if I do this. So I figured it out. Verse number 5. So he summoned each one of his master's debtors. He called them in one by one. And he said, how much do you owe my master? He asked the first one. 100 measures of olive oil, he said. That's about 900 gallons. 100 measures of olive oil, he said. And so the manager looked at him. He said, take your invoice, take it out, get something to write with. He said, sit down quickly. Don't have much time here. My time's limited. He said, and write 50. So from 100 to 50, it's a 50% savings, right? And from 900 gallons of olive oil down to 450. He said, write that down. That's all you owe. Now, let me ask you, put yourself in that person's place. If someone cut your mortgage in half, what would you say? Yeah, that's just for starters, right? If someone cut your car loan in half, right? Your student debt in half. Here's the biggie. Your credit card balance in half. What would you say? Thank you. Wow. Man, what could I ever do to pay you back? To which the manager, I imagine, in my sanctified imagination, he says, don't worry about it. Stay by your phone. I'll be calling soon, right? Don't forget what I've just done for you. Verse 7, then he asked another, how much do you owe? And this one said, 100 measures of wheat. That's 1,000 bushels. And he said, take your invoice, he told him, and write 80. So he cut it 20%. To which I'm sure he said, thank you, man. I don't know what I've done, but I really appreciate it if I can ever do anything. I know. You may be hearing from me soon. Now, this rich group back here behind the disciples, they've been listening. All of them have got managers. All of them are people of means. And they're listening to this, and they're hearing what this manager's doing with the funds and the possessions that are not even there, not even his to do this with. And they're thinking, man, this is wrong. This is so wrong. Boy, if I go back and I find out my manager's been doing this, it's bad news. So they've been listening to this. How can this manager mismanage what was not even his in the first place? Verse number 8. You know, every plot has a good twist. This story Jesus is telling, this is the twist. Verse number 8. The master chewed out the unrighteous manager. Is that what it says? He what? He praised him. What? He praised him for going into every one of his the people that owed him and saying, you don't owe my master as nearly as much. I'm cutting it 50%. I'm cutting it by 20%. You don't know. He praised him for that? Isn't that taking money out of his pocket? Isn't that hurting the business? He praised him. Here's why, Jesus said. Because he acted astutely. The word means wisely or shrewdly. Because, in other words, he took advantage of an opportunity. And the master, being a wise businessman himself, realized what had happened. He said, that's pretty good, buddy. You secured your future at my expense. Good move. And he praised him. You see, God is letting us see how he views money. He explains it last part of verse number 8, for the sons of this age. Who's he talking about? Those who live as if this life is all that there is. Those who have no time for God, for eternity. They just get up every morning, go to work, go do what they do what they want to don't do what they don't want to do, because this is all there is, this life, no thought of eternity. Those are the sons of this age. They are more astute, they're more wise, they're more shrewd than the sons of light. That's those of us, the way Jesus refers to those of us who are following Christ, who are the salt and light in this world. We know there's a future, we know there's a heaven that lasts for eternity. But the sons of this age are more astute than the sons of light in dealing with their own people and how they deal with each other and their possessions. Those who live as if this life on earth is all there is, they're more shrewd with money than those of us who know there's a heaven. So now Jesus is going to apply. Every good lesson makes an application. Here's what it is, verse number 9. And I tell you, Jesus said, I can just see them kind of leaning in. He said, come here. I tell you, make friends for yourself by means of the unrighteous money, so that when it fails, they may welcome you into eternal dwellings. And I picture the disciples saying, what? What are you saying? Can you say that again? Make friends for yourselves by means of the unrighteous money, so that when it fails, they may welcome you into eternal dwelling. That makes no sense. Jesus, what are you talking about? Jesus is saying, hey guys, use money, use your stuff, use your possessions, that which money has bought and acquired for you and all that. Use it to make friends for heaven. Invest it in ways that helps people come to know Christ as their Savior, to become part of God's family, to become followers of Jesus Christ, and so that they'll live forever. Not only enjoy this life to its fullest, but enjoy heaven forever. Make friends by the use of money, invested in such a way, so that when the money fails, it's no longer good, it no longer has any value, and you leave this life, they'll be there ready to welcome you into eternal habitations. They'll be in heaven waiting for you to get there. Can you wrap your mind around that picture Jesus is painting? He's teaching them and teaching us to invest money that will help people come to know Christ as their Savior, so that when we leave this world and go to be with Him in glory, that we'll be surrounded and welcomed by those who got there because you and I gave generously out of the overflow, and they came to know Christ as their Savior. Maybe it's through the ministry of Ignite Church, maybe through local things that you do there, or the ministry here, or worldwide missions. They come to know Christ because of your generosity. Jesus said, that's what you should be doing with your money. So what's the lesson from this? What's Jesus trying to say? First of all, He's pulling the curtain back and He's letting us see that God sees money as an instrument to use. It's something for you and I to use for a purpose. Now, the world says money's an instrument to use. It's an instrument to use, as far as the world's concerned, to make you happy. Because it can buy this, it can buy that. Here's what the world asks. It says, hey, for all your money, what have you got to show for it? What do you drive? Where do you live? What do you wear? Where do you vacation? How much bling have you got? How many zeros in your bank account? What have you got to show for it? God asked the question a little differently. Who have you got to show for it? Who is there that has come to know Christ as Savior? Are you sitting in the same room this morning with someone that has come to be part of the family of God because of your giving? Even right here at Ignite? Through your generosity? Who have you got to show for it? Now, for years I've been preaching. Pastor Jason said I've been preaching a long time, and he's right. And he's right for as long as he's been alive. I've been doing this. And when I talk about money, inevitably somebody will meet me after the service, at least in the churches that I pastor, and they'd say, now, preacher, if I had more, I'd give more. And I always wanted to say, I never said it. I'm kind of a chicken at heart, I guess. I don't know. I always wanted to say, no, you wouldn't. I wanted to. Preacher, if I had more, I'd give more. I always had a guy who said, preacher, if I win the lottery, if I win the sweepstakes, if I had more, I'd give more. And I'd say, no, you wouldn't. Now, maybe that's the way you think. I'd give more if I had more. And with all the love in my heart, say, no, you wouldn't. You say, Tony, you don't know me. You're exactly right. I don't. But Jesus does. And look what Jesus said in verse number 10. Whoever, is faithful in very little. Anybody identify with very little? Whoever is faithful in very little is also faithful in what? Much. However generous you are when you have very little is how generous you will be when you have very much. Is that what he's saying, or am I reading into it? Whoever is faithful in very little is also faithful in much, and whoever is unrighteous, that means the opposite of faithful. You mismanage when you have very little. You don't do what God says to do with it. Is also unrighteous in much. If you don't handle it well when you don't have much, you will not handle it well when you have more. This is Jesus. And Jesus knows us. And this is what he says. If you did not use the money or the stuff that it can get for the purpose that it was entrusted to you or loaned to you, you're not going to do it when you have more. For he goes on to say, who will trust you with what is genuine, that which is going to last forever? And if you have not been faithful with what belongs to someone else, what's he talking about? You see, everything you and I have belongs to him. It's all his. I know the paycheck has your name on it, and I know you worked to get it. But you and I wouldn't have one red cent if it weren't for God giving us the soundness of mind, the soundness of body, the opportunity to make that money. It all belongs to him. And he says, if you've not been faithful with what belongs to someone else, who's going to give you what is your own, that which is going to be yours for eternity? You see, money is an instrument for you and I to use, to invest, to make friends for heaven, to invite people and help them to come to know the forgiveness of sin and the joy of being part of God's family, to be a follower of Christ, so that we'll enjoy heaven together. It proves our faithfulness. But also God sees money as an exam to pass. Not just as an instrument to use, but an exam to pass. Now, when I was in school and the teacher walked in and said, clear your desk, take out a clean sheet of paper and a number 2 pencil. You remember that? My heart would always stop, right? I'd get a little parch and a lump in my throat. Because that meant an exam. And it was usually one I was not prepared for. But I want you to be prepared for this exam. God sees the way you use money as an exam to pass. You see, we've all been given a little. We've all been given some amount. And God is watching. God is interested. One day we'll be held accountable. And just as this manager was called in to stand before his master, his Lord, and had to give an account, you and I will one day stand before God himself and give an account. And he's watching to see how we do it and how we pass this exam. You see, how you manage what you think is yours is a reflection of your love for the one who actually owns it all. What you're doing with it. What you've done this past week, this past month, with the money that came into your possession has been a reflection. It has shown your love for him by whether you did with it what God says to do with it or not. How many of us know that Jesus came and talked more about what you do with money and possessions than he did any other subject? Is it because Jesus was greedy? No, he owned it all. It's because he knew the number one rival for your affection and for your love for him. That's why he talked about it. It's the number one rival. How you manage what you think is yours reflects your love for the one who actually owns it. Now see, if you're here today and you're not a Christian, you say, Tony, I'm not a Christian. I don't follow Christ. I'm just kind of here. Somebody invited me, or I'm just kind of checking this thing out. That's great. And I'll just tell you, where this is concerned, you're kind of off the hook. You don't have to do, because you've not submitted to the authority of Jesus. But if you're a Christian, it's too late. We signed on, didn't we? Right? And this is what God says that we should do. It's an exam to pass. Look at verse 13. No household, Jesus said, no household slave, no servant, can be a slave of two masters. Since either he will hate one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You can't, it didn't say you shouldn't be. It says you can't be slaves to both God and money. The old King James says mammon. You remember reading that? Can't serve God and money. The stuff that money can get. You just can't. You say, well, Tony, that's no problem to me because I'm not a slave to anybody. I'm free. Jesus said, no, we all serve someone or something. There's someone or something that is always determining the choices you make, the things you do, and how you think. It's either going to be God. The first thing you consider when you've got a choice to make is either going to be God and what He says about it, or chances are it's going to be, how does this affect my finances? Do I have the money for it? How's this going to hurt me? And so you can't be slaves to God and money. I want to ask you a question. I'm going to ask you to be honest and transparent for a minute, and I will be, okay? Have you ever had a desire for something? Have you ever wanted something and it caused you to do something, shall I say, stupid? That you shouldn't have done? Have you ever bought anything that you really didn't need? Have you ever bought something, you ever got something that you could not afford? Have you ever got something that it had depreciated before you even got it home? Had broken before you got it paid off? I'm seeing more and more heads, that you're still paying on it and it's in a closet or a garage or a storage room right now collecting dust. I'm going to be honest with you, I have. I've been to one of those big box stores and walked in and saw something that I did not even know existed. I didn't even know there was such a thing. And I said, whoa, man, how have I been living life without this? And within 15 minutes, I've convinced myself I got to have it, buy it, take it home. 20 minutes ago, I didn't even know there was one. I've done some things that are not too smart, and I didn't pass the exam. I failed it. Was not a good manager of what God had entrusted me with. So it's an exam to pass. It's an instrument to use, and it's a trademark to identify. God sees money as a trademark to identify. You know what a trademark is? Trademark is something that identifies ownership. When you see the trademark, you say, well, that company owns that. Or that person owns that. You see, what you and I do with what we have identifies whose we are, who we belong to. Are you hearing me? Ignite, hear me. How you manage what's been loaned to you is one of your greatest testimonies that you know Jesus. Because if you do with money and your possessions what God says to do it, there's going to be a stark difference between the way your neighbor, the rest of your family, your friends, your coworkers, your other classmates at school, the way they do things with you. And they may want to know why you do that. And you get to tell them. What you do with what you have identifies whose you are. You see, you're never more like God than when you're giving. You're never more like God than when you're generous. You know how I know that? You know that. I don't even have to tell you. You know how you know that? For God so loved the world that He what? Gave. God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son. Is that a generous gift or not? Is there ever been a more generous gift? That He gave His Son to come down here, who was sinless and perfect, yet He took the penalty for my sin, and He died the death that I should have died. I was due that penalty. That sentence was on me, and Jesus took my place so that I could be forgiven, and I could experience the love of God and live with Him forever. What a generous gift God gives and has invested. And when we give, we reflect whose we are. Let's look at the last two verses, verse 14, 15. The Pharisees, you remember that group that's out there? Luke says, who were lovers of money. They were listening to all these things and scoffing at Him. They were sitting back there and they're saying, can you believe this guy? He's telling this story. He's talking about a manager that mismanaged funds that he was put in trust in, and he was praised. Can you believe that? This story makes no sense whatsoever. They're scoffing, making fun at him. And here's what Jesus said. He told them, you are the ones who justify yourselves. By the way, Ignite, that's the same temptation you and I are going to have when we leave this room this morning. We're going to be tempted, maybe even where you sit right this moment, you and I are going to be tempted to justify or make excuse for why we're not going to do anything differently than what we've already been doing. We're going to justify why we are not going to invest the way God says to invest. Why we're not going to handle our possessions differently than the way we've been handling it, even though God says differently. He said, you're the ones who justify yourselves in the sight of others, but God knows your heart. For what is highly admired by people is revolting in God's sight. That's pretty strong language, isn't it? God is revolted by the way you and I use money, the way everybody else does. That they say, wow, look what you've got. See, we're so good at justifying ourselves. We say, if I had more, I'd give more. We're good at talking ourselves out of being generous. You know, hey, Pastor Jason, I would give to that offering. I'd help out with the feeding the children on the weekends through the backpacks. I would give to the missions. I would give to the ministry of reaching others with the gospel through Ignite. But I've got that payment. It's more than I could afford. Bought something I shouldn't have. I got all that debt. We got our excuses. But can I just remind you, as humbly as I know how, God knows our heart. He knows what we put, prioritized before doing what He says to do with His money that we've been entrusted with. Now, I got to bring this to a close. But I don't know if you've noticed this or not, but I'm pretty proud of myself. I preached a whole message and have not mentioned tithing one time. That's pretty good, isn't it? I've not talked about giving 10% one time. Now, there's a couple of reasons for that. Number one is that Pastor Jason did an awesome job preaching about tithing last Sunday. And if you were here, you heard it, and hopefully you've done something about it. If you weren't, you need to go online and listen to it. Okay? The other reason why I've not mentioned tithing is because Jesus in this passage was not teaching them to give 10% and then do whatever they wanted to with the other 90%. That's not what He was doing here. I didn't come from Knoxville, Tennessee here today to talk to you about the 10%. I came to talk to you about the 100%. Because that's what Jesus is talking about. You see, the Pharisees tithed. They gave 10% of absolutely everything that they got. As a matter of fact, about the only thing you will find Jesus ever saying positive about or to the Pharisees was that they tithed. That's about it. They tithed, but watch this. Luke says they were lovers of money. And what do we know from the words of Jesus about those who love money? If you love money, you can't love God. If you're serving money and whatever you do is to get more or whatever, you can't serve God. They tithed, but they loved their money. They gave their 10%, checked that box, and then did whatever they wanted to with what was left. And Jesus came to show us that's not how God sees money. That's mismanagement of it. Jesus came to say, just like God, He wants us to be generous. Generosity has nothing to do with how much money you have or don't have. Very little or a lot. You can be generous with any or hardly any. Because it's not a matter of money, it's a matter of heart. It's a matter of love. It's a matter of obedience. Generosity. Now, I just want to remind you that just like that manager, we've all been given a little of this. A little time. I don't know how much time you've been given. I don't know how much time I have. But we've all been given a little time. Time to get God's perspective. Time to make a change. Time to do something different. Time to see money the way God sees it and start going along with it. We've all been given a little time, and we've all been given resources. Now, I don't know how much of that you have, but we've all been given some. I'm going to go out on a limb to say that I have more of that than you have. I feel pretty confident in saying that I have more of that than all of you put together. Because those are counterfeit $100 bills, and I'm pretty sure most of you don't have any of those. But you understand what they represent, don't you? We've all been given a little time. We've been given some opportunity. Will you use it wisely? Will today you let God take the camera and pull it back from the way you've been looking at your finances, your possessions? Instead of seeing it the way you've been seeing it, will you let Him pull back and get the picture of reality the way God sees it? That God sees money as an instrument to use to help people come to know Christ. That's why Tricia and I give generously to our local church and to other organizations that help people come to know Christ as Savior. It's an exam to pass. It shows that we realize who it all belongs to, and that we belong to Him. We're His, and so we're going to do with it what He says. And it's a trademark that identifies us as different than everybody else because we belong to Him. And He gives generously to us. And so we give generously to others. So here's what I want you to take home with you today. Starting today, or maybe with your next check, your next direct deposit, whatever comes into your possession, what are you going to do with it? How are you going to look at it? How are you going to invest it? You can go back and just do things the way you always have been doing it. Or with a fresh perspective, how God sees it, are you going to take the time that you have and the resource that you have, and you're going to do it different? You're going to make a change. You're going to do something wise, something astute, something shrewd. You're going to take advantage of an opportunity. Here's what I know. Some of us in here would give more if we weren't so deep in debt. One of the wisest things I ever did was get out of debt. You know how I did that? I did it through Ramsey Plus. I did it through Financial Peace University. I know Ignite Church is now signing up, and you're going to be doing it. And I strongly encourage you, whatever you got to do, to get signed up for that. The church that I last pastored, we took over 100 families through it at one time. Got people out of debt, and it freed up their money so that they could give and invest as God says to do it. Get out of debt. I hate to use the B word, but get on a budget, a spending plan. Figure out where it's going, where it's being wasted, and be intentional about it. You're managing God's stuff. Don't fail the exam. Stand one day accountable before Him and reap the benefit of overflow. God wants you to see money the way He does, so you can live in the overflow of His grace, of His peace, of His blessing, of His love. Would you pray with me today? Father, thank you for letting us, through the words of Jesus, see how you view money. You view what we are in possession of right now and what we will become possessors of in the weeks, months, and years to follow. And help us today to determine by your grace and with your help to obey what you say to do with it, because we see now what you see. That we can be wise and faithful with it now and reap the benefits forever. Help today that young person, that couple, to determine to take a close look at what they're doing with what they have so that they can be like you and be generous. Maybe today, Father, somebody needs to go to the prayer and care room after the service and speak to someone and say, hey, I know I need to do something. Help me with my next step. Where should I go from here? What should my next step be? Maybe this week somebody needs to make an appointment with one of the pastors and find out what that step needs to be. God, don't let us leave here today unchanged, is my prayer. May every one of us determine to do differently because of a little bit of time, a little bit of opportunity that we have. Help us to be wise. We'll be forever grateful and glad that we did. In Jesus' name.